Who is it? Hold on. I think this is the wrong account.
Hello, everyone. I think everyone. It's impossible to tell exactly who's watching, but welcome to Dinner and a Movie. Um, this is our first attempt at having dinner and a movie with all of our with all of our folks. I'm getting some chat notifications that you can hear me, so that's good to know. I'm getting texts that I'm heard. So again, welcome. Please bear with us through these glitches as this is our first time. Again, welcome to Dinner and a Movie. Tonight we're going to be what's going on, Tammy? Hi. We're going to be seeing a great film called Tazzeka. Um, you may have seen the preview for it. You may have read a little bit about it, but we're going to hear about it from one of our speakers pretty soon. First thing I want to do is ask everybody, you've got your takeout, or maybe you've cooked something at home, or maybe you're eating leftovers, but we'd love to see what you're eating, and just sort of to make this a little bit more of a community thing, go ahead and tweet it, put it on Instagram, put it on Facebook. Use our hashtags, hashtag FFF online, hashtag FFF dinner and a movie, or hashtag FFF20. And we will share those and I'll enjoy those. I think we'll also see a couple of links to that in the chat function. So tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to see a movie that's going to be introduced by one of our esteemed guest, Peggy Markel. She'll be back afterwards to have a conversation with another one of our guests, Sara Brito. They're going to be talking about the film, they're going to be talking about food, and they're going to be talking about really what restaurants look like in this current day and age. As we all know, it's dicey and it's different and things have changed. If you need any help with technical information during the film, please click on the help button. Click on the chat button on your Zoom window, and our moderator will help with that. And if you have questions afterwards for the panelists, and we'll remind you again, but you can use the Q&A function at the bottom, and we'll try our best to get all of those questions answered during the discussion time. I see that Kubi made some Moroccan chicken and butternut squash soup. I wish I was having that. Next thing I'd like to do is I'd like to thank our sponsors. Our Silver Spoon sponsors are the Big Red F Group, Black Cat Bistro, Bramble and Hare, Highland Honey, Local Table Tours, Pack a Fork, Root Marketing and PR, and the Savory Spice Shop in Boulder. Other sponsors are the Boulder County Farmers Market, the International Film Series, and Slow Food Boulder County. Before we get started, let's have a look at what we're watching next week. Everybody loves sushi. We're gonna be streaming this again for the next. Sorry, not streaming this again. We're going to be hosting films for the next few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, and potentially even longer after that, to try to keep everybody feeling comfortable at home in these times. Next week, we're going to be watching a film called East Side Sushi. Who doesn't love sushi? I don't know. There might be a few of you out there, but I hear it's popular. So let's just take a quick look at that before we move on to tonight's film. Please hang tight. We are either not playing the trailer or the trailer is not playing. Too much lag on the video. So please go to YouTube if you get a chance and have a look at the at a trailer for the movie East Side Sushi. It's much easier to bumble through this when there's not an audience there. I'm much more comfortable from one of our guest rooms. Okay, so I'd like to introduce now Peggy Markel. She's going to be on the panel after the movie, and we'll also be introducing the film. Peggy is the founder of Peggy Markel Culinary Adventures, and she's been at the forefront of the slow food and farm to table movement since the early 90s. She's a storyteller who, through food, has perfected the art of cultural immersion. Her culinary adventures have taken her from India throughout the Mediterranean, and then apropos of tonight, has taken her to Morocco. So, Peggy, welcome. You might be on mute, Peggy. Can we unmute Peggy?
Hear me?
Hey, Peggy.
Hello?
We can hear you now.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Hi, Greg. It's Peggy Markel, just so I let you know that. But I have a lot of friends out in this audience, I think, and I'm very happy, to be in the country, to be able to be a part of this. And it's just super exciting to be at home. I've got my tagine on the stove, and I know that all the people out there are enjoying various dishes that have come from the restaurants we know and love. And I also just want to say a big salam alaikum if there's anybody from Morocco out there, and just to thank you, for joining us. And it's also the second day, I think, of Ramadan, which is really important in Morocco at this period. So I just wanted to be able to mention that because it's actually happening. So as Greg said, I direct culinary adventures around the world, and I have had a really great fortune of spending about the last 20 years, at least twice a year in Morocco. And so I really love it. I've worked with several chefs and home cooks and immerse myself in the culture through the food, which is kind of my motto and the thing I like to do the most. It's also how I like to travel. It's allowed me to enter quite a few kitchens around the world, village kitchens, farmhouses, restaurants, and private guest houses. And so sort of the thing I love about this movie is that it takes place in the mountains. And I love the Atlas Mountains, and I've spent a lot of time there, especially right outside of Marrakesh, about an hour and a half. So the landscape for the movie Tazzeka is familiar to me. And Berber life is agrarian. If you don't know much about Berber life, they are the original people of Morocco. Life is centered around growing and preparing food. They are friendly and hospitable people. Family is everything. They're some of the kindest people I've ever met. Family can descend at any moment on a household, and the household will provide. I would trust them with my life, and at many times I've actually kind of had to depend on them. More on that later. I would hope that even though Berbers have been conquered by many, they've maintained their traditional ways. They'll catch you off guard with their sense of humor, as they love to joke. The cities of Morocco are becoming more modern, even with the donkeys still pulling carts next to the fancy cars, living side by side. The French ruled Morocco for 50 years, 1912 until 1956. I don't know if you know that. But the influence, needless to say, was enormous, affecting their way of life and living. It also brought incredible fusion into their food, fashion, architecture, and lifestyle. Let's explore the influence in this upcoming movie. Tazzeka is a small village in the Rif Mountains of northern Morocco. Like all Berber villages, there is a strong sense of family, and the table is central to their lives. The grandmothers are extremely influential, and no less so in this coming-of-age movie about a young boy in love with the sound of food as he recites menus in French before bed at night. He stays close to his grandmother's side as she teaches him how to roll the couscous between his hands. It's an idyllic life, full of nature and simplicity. But as he grows up, his love for cooking grows too. Where will this lead, and to what end? This is a dilemma for many who want to earn money and must leave the village to find work, but even more of a tragedy for an artisan whose dream is to become a serious chef. If he wants to realize his dream, he will have to take some risks. This movie takes you on a journey from the old world to the new, and the double bind it presents for our young, aspiring chef. It will break his grandmother's heart if he leaves. It's also never easy to leave one's homeland for another, but even more of a tragedy for an artisan whose dream is to be, oh, sorry about that, for another. Life as an immigrant, illegal at best, is tricky. Will he find work? Will he find love? Does he have what it takes to survive away from home? Pay attention to the decor of the houses, the kilims, the textiles. Notice the dress of the old ones, the jalaba and skull cap of the villagers, the terracotta tagine, the blue houses of Shashawan, the language and the music. These are all identifiable as Moroccan and distinguish Morocco from other North African countries. It's easy to appreciate and identify with how groundless and naive it must feel not to know where your next meal is coming from and where you will lay your head. But you must go as if propelled by some invisible compass. Watch what happens when heart and generosity rule. The Moroccan way is steeped in courage and determination, no less a hero's journey and a surprising return to culture and culinary roots. So that's that about introducing the movie. So now I have to ask you to return to Zoom after the movie to watch the discussion and the Q&A. Join us again at 1 hour and 45 minutes from now, which includes 1 hour, 35 minutes for the movie and a 5-minute bathroom break. There's a chat message from us with the film access information. Click the link in the chat message to open their browser, and you can start the movie after they enter the password, after you enter the password. This access information is also in the Eventbrite message that you received. All right, well, let's enjoy this movie, and we'll see you after for a little bit of Q&A and talk about Morocco.
Peggy,
Yeah.
Greg wanted to mention the restaurants. He wanted to thank the restaurants that helped us with this event.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that, and forgive me on the mispronunciation of your name, Peggy.
No problem. I just thought I'd tell you.
But yeah, just a quick shout out to a bunch of restaurants that were involved tonight, and we want to see them come back after COVID-19 recedes. In Boulder, we thank Cafe Ion and Black Belly. In Longmont, we thank Babette's. And in Lafayette, we thank Community. And of course, down in Denver, we thank Fruition. So thanks, guys. Enjoy the movie. And thank you for dealing with our technical learnings.
And can either one of you do the math really quick to let us know when the panel is going to come back on?
Greg, that's probably better for you.
Sure. Sorry, would you say that one more time?
What time is the panel going to come back on for the discussion?
Yeah, so the hours, the movie is about an hour and 35 minutes, and then we're going to leave an extra 10 minutes. We'll be back on at around 8:30 for the panel discussion.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome, thank you guys.
Have been some technical difficulties, and we tried to sort those out throughout the movie, but a few of us will be arriving late. With that in mind, we're just going to have to continually welcome them to the discussion. But thank you all for still being a part of this. I hope everybody has enjoyed their dinner, and I hope everybody enjoyed the movie. I can see that Kuvi loved the movie and thought it was awesome. And Jesse didn't have any difficulties. So I'm glad some of you made it through. Sometimes spam filters slow things down. Something else that I'm realizing, as Megan Buckholes has pointed out to me, that I really need to work on lighting in this whole thing. So we'll have all of these issues smoothed out by next week, or at least somewhat smoothed out by next week. I'd like to introduce Sara Brito now, and she is going to be moderating the discussion between her and Peggy about the movie, about the culture that we just witnessed, about restaurants and where they are today, and kind of just food in general. So again, questions for the panel will be, you could send them into the Q&A logo or the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window, and Sara will attempt to answer all of them or address all of them in a smooth fashion. So Sara Brito is the co-founder of the Good Food Media Nation. It's a 501c3 nonprofit, and what they do is they publish the Good Food 100 restaurants. It's an annual list of the top restaurants that educate, and she loves to educate eaters on restaurants, especially those that are transparent with their business and their purchasing practices. I guess it should be pointed out that in response to COVID-19, the Good Food 100 Restaurants has launched a new state and national online guide to good food farmers, producers, and purveyors. It's curated by chefs, and it's to help eaters like us find good food directly from the folks that are producing it and making it. So Sara, welcome. Peggy, welcome back. Thanks again for everybody staying tuned, and apologies for the glitches. We'll probably have some people joining us as we move along. Sara.
Hi, can you hear me? Can someone type something in the chat or text me and just let me know that, okay, good. I don't know if we have Peggy back yet. I don't see her on my screen yet. So while we're waiting for hopefully Peggy to dial in, not dial in, but rejoin us, welcome back to everyone. Hi to some familiar faces that I see in the, well, not familiar faces, familiar names that I see in the chat in this time of sheltering at home. I'm sheltering at home on my own, although you may notice that I have a companion, Barack. Barack is my quarantine companion. It's nice to be with you all this evening. This is my first Friday night out, out as in. It's the first Friday night that you all inspired me to wear what I saw on social media referred to as hard pants, as in like, I think actually real pants rather than yoga pants. And even put on a little lip gloss and mascara for you all. As I was in my bathroom, I wondered if I even remembered how to put makeup on anymore. But anyways, before we jump into the conversation and as we're waiting for Peggy to rejoin us, I just want to make a few remarks about the state of the world that we're in, and specifically the state of the restaurant industry. Because that is my reason for being here, my connection to the food world, my connection to chefs and to restaurants. We're headquartered, I live in Boulder, we're headquartered in Denver, but I work with chefs and restaurants all across the country. And I think what I would mostly like to share with you is direct you to an article that I'm sure some of you have already read, as it's been circulating social media since it was published on the New York Times yesterday. And it's an article written by chef and restaurant owner Gabrielle Hamilton of Prune in New York City. And for all of the eaters and foodies and people who care about food, whether you work in the restaurant industry or not, I'd really encourage you to seek out this article. It's going to appear in print in the New York Times Magazine tomorrow. What day are we on? Friday, Sunday morning. But it's already been published, as they often do, start publishing things that appear in the magazine online as early as Wednesday or Thursday. And it's just one of the, to me, it is the, but I'll say it is one of the link. Oh, thanks, Kuvi, for posting the link. It is the most poignant description of the severe impact that COVID-19 is having on the restaurant industry. And it is, it describes not only the impact that this COVID-19 crisis is having on the restaurant industry, but it goes into depth as to the sort of the cracks and the fault lines that existed in the restaurant business model even before this crisis hit the industry so hard, and really is a cry for help to the world, to the federal government, that this industry is not going to survive the way we all know it before March 13th without federal relief. And so without taking up too much time tonight, I do want to encourage you all, as many of you did tonight, by ordering from some of the participating restaurants that made Moroccan-inspired food for us to enjoy during this film. I personally ordered from Black Belly, which is the closest restaurant to me, and also Chef Hosea Rosenberg and Black Belly are featured on the 2019 Good Food 100 Restaurants list. Although in full disclosure, and as a quarantine confession, I will confess that I did not order the Moroccan-inspired dish. I ordered a double cheeseburger because it is my first cheeseburger of quarantine, and I was really craving it. So you can support your local restaurants by buying takeout from them, by buying gift cards from them, by supporting all of the various restaurant worker relief programs that are out there. I'd specifically like to call your attention to the James Beard Foundation's Restaurant Relief Fund, which is giving $15,000 grants to restaurants that apply to it. And they are grants, they're not loans. And all the ways that we can show our love back to the chefs and restaurant workers that feed us throughout the year. But that said, I do encourage you to read this article for just, you know, the most beautiful and tragic love story of what it means to be a chef and own a restaurant. So I hope you enjoy that article and learn something from it and support your local restaurants. So with no further ado, let's get to the star of our post-film Q&A. I want to invite Peggy Markel to rejoin us and take herself off of mute. Peggy, can you hear me? Can you see me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. It's so nice to hang out with you on the phone.
Hey, I know.
It does feel like we're hanging out because it's
From
like
you and Barack to me and my books and tagines.
Exactly.
There you go.
You have your ambiance, I have my ambiance,
Yeah.
and we've got several people who are going to eavesdrop on our conversation.
That's okay.
Before we let them in on it to ask their own questions.
Okay.
So let's start with the film. People, hopefully everybody met Peggy when she did our great introduction to the film before we all went off into our own living rooms to watch it. But Peggy is the founder of Peggy Markel's Culinary Adventures, and we're gonna get to her travel business and her personal experiences in Morocco, but I'd like to start close in with the film itself. So my first question to you is simply, what resonated with you personally with this film? What you know, what did you connect with, especially as you're stuck, or as I guess we're supposed to say, safe at home instead of
Yeah.
or safe at home, and not in Morocco, and probably longing to travel, because traveling is your life. What resonated with you about this film?
So many things resonated, especially when I think of this young chef or young boy who was from this village and he had a dream and he sort of just let it percolate in him. And, you know, I also came from a small town and, you know, I also let my dream percolate and it took me sort of further afield, so that when you say, you know, what resonated, that actually resonates with me deeply. To be here in Colorado right now, I was just saying, you know, to David, my partner, just to be able to bring Morocco into the kitchen right now. And having just come from Morocco a month ago, it's sort of like, it's easy for me. The veils are very thin for me to turn on the stove, make a tagine, which I did tonight, and think of Morocco, be totally absorbed into the movie, those green rolling hills, you know, the culture itself, the donkey with the sticks. I mean, you know, like that is so Moroccan. And so it warms my heart because I feel a real resonance because I've been going there now for close to 20 years. And so I really have a deep love for Morocco. And it's really easy. It's like, it's not very far from my memory or my, you know, my taste to be thinking about Morocco or being, you know, involved in that movie in that way.
You know, it's interesting that you talk about the dream. Like you said, this is a story of a boy, of a chef with a dream. One of the things that stood out for me, especially the second time I watched it this evening, was something that's very typical of immigrant cultures, but also working class cultures, and in a contrast to, I think one of the themes that to me is sort of parallel to our conversation is this notion of privilege, you know, because we're sitting, you know, all of us, I assume, that are part of this evening, this Flatiron Food Film Festival evening, are sitting in our houses with roofs over our heads, with access to food. And so in a sense, Wi-Fi, living with privilege. And that what that young boy had to do was he had to simultaneously do all the things that were required of him in his village and in his job, while also simultaneously working towards his dream. Whereas a lot of times people of privilege get to do things in a much more linear fashion. Just thinking of a conversation that I had with my sister a few months back when I asked her why her kids weren't doing more chores of a particular kind. My sister's response to me was, well, they're really busy with their schoolwork and they have to focus on their school. And it was a very one track, like they have to work on their dream. The kids get to work on their dream and they don't necessarily have to be, you know, bogged down with village type chores, and just how hard that is for an immigrant who has to do both simultaneously.
Well, I think the point of being an immigrant, and I think the reason that the filmmaker wanted to make this film was to give some context to where, you know, some context about the real life of a Moroccan. You know, when we see them on the streets selling carpets, or, you know, which some people would find annoying to clean the, you know, the windshield, and you think, oh gosh, you know, I just wish these guys would leave me alone. I think he's trying to give you a different view on the humanness of these people, these immigrants who are just like us, and that they have families and they have dreams and they're good people, and that they have really risked a lot to be able to either try to make money to send back to their families or to have a life, you know. And I really am quite clear that's why he made the movie. And I think that was very courageous of him, because usually I think often immigrants are seen in a poor light. And so I thought it showed the struggles, and I thought it showed the humanitarian, well, I don't want to say humanitarian. What I want to say is what I said in my intro is just the generosity and heart, of the Moroccan. And to see him be that same way, a sense of strength also for others, and selfless in a way, and really inspired. And so I really appreciated that he was able to shine a light on that.
So I want to go back to something you asked people to look out for in the film. In your introduction, you asked them to pay attention to the scenery and the colors and the kilns and different aspects that they were going to observe about Moroccan life. And so my question to you is, and it relates to a question that's coming in, and we'll do an open Q&A at the end, but if I can, I'll try to weave in people's questions as well to our conversation, which is, what about the film, you mentioned you've been traveling there for 20 years. So what about the film fit with your personal observations and experiences with Morocco? And what was perhaps new and just different from what you've seen before? And in particular, as this relates to a question coming in, the question is about, are we seeing a typical village? Is this an atypical Moroccan village? And how remote, do we think this village is? Or could a village like this exist right outside of a city like Marrakesh? So I'd love to hear your experiences about what was similar or different to your experience and observations in Morocco.
Well, that was one reason why I said pay attention, to what you see, because there were many things in, that from what we saw. I told you, the ceramics, the weavings, those are all typical for mountain crafts, And so even the language, there were so many things that were very similar, and also making the bread, the khobs, you could see them when they make the flatbreads. And so that was all very Moroccan. And then from what I know, I haven't spent that much time in the north of Morocco. I've been to the north of Morocco, but my trips and also my experience has been more in the Marrakesh area and the High Atlas Mountains and the Berber villages there. And the Berber villages there are truly, I think some of the older, more ancient villages where, the dress is very typical. Now, the dress was pretty typical that they were using there, but the village itself seemed to me a little more modern. And I think that's because it was closer to Tangier, and Tangier is a little closer to Europe. And so further down, I think you get more into Moroccan culture, steeped in Berbers, as I know Berbers to be. And, where I take people to have tea up in this little village is basically the last village before you go into, say, hiking up to Mount Tukal, which is the highest mountain in the Atlas. And that's at, the tallest mountain is like 13, almost 14,000 feet. And so the village at that point is probably, it may be 8 or 9 Arem. I really should know that. But, and we sit in this little kind of barn area where they make tea, and we look out, to the mountains, and, they're dressed in their, pajamas, basically. That's just what they wear. And they sleep on, pretty basic, they're not like a futon, but it's almost like a higher futon that would become like, couch in the day, sleeping at night. And so there are some things that are very different, but their land is terraced. I know that it wasn't up to just a few years ago that they had electricity. They're very agrarian, like I said. They have walnut groves, and they're planting fruit trees, and there's lots of water. So the women are carrying sticks on their backs. They're tending to cows. That's what they do. And so in that sense, it was very different. Very similar, but the differences were that it seemed a little more modern. And I think I told you that that was different for me.
Mm-hmm. A related question, because you started talking about some of the villages that you travel to, a question came in, and I'll try to keep track of who's asking them. So this is also from Dina. Dina had asked the previous question as well, which is, you know, in a village like this, would this be the only place to eat and drink tea communally? Are there typically more than, you know, one place to eat and drink tea in a village? And how far away do you think that market was? Like, were they going off to the big city to market, and then that was the only store, restaurant, tea place in their little village?
I think that maybe the movie took some poetic license there. You know, I don't really know if they were in Chefchaouen. Maybe it could have been a bigger village. I mean, a bigger market. That was a huge market. You don't see even those kinds of markets in Marrakesh. So I'm not quite sure exactly. Could have been Tangier for that matter. I have no idea where they were. And as far as tea houses, the tea houses that I like to go to when I'm in the villages are people's homes. But there are what they call gîtes, which is the French, you know, for a little inn where you could come in and almost, you know, and stay overnight and have a meal. They do exist in a lot of the villages, but I would say most often, and this is just my experience, you stay or you have tea in people's homes. But often that's also because you're with a guide or someone who's from the village who's taken you to someone they know. And it's not like your typical guide. He's just a mountain person who, you know, can take you where you need to go, because often it's not that easy to know how to, you know, you don't really go into these villages by yourself. So you choose someone, and or they're chosen for you, but they're like mountain people. They live there.
You know, one question I meant to ask you actually before we got on was a question I actually had about the film, because I wasn't really sure about the ending. Did he lie when he went back home to make it appear as if he had made it successfully in Paris? Or because the part that we saw in the film was that the chef wasn't really as warm to him, wasn't accommodating, and therefore he started selling his own food on the street. But then all of a sudden, you know, fast forward, he was going back to Morocco and presented Yusuf with the photo. So I wasn't sure, was there like a sort of speeding up of reality and a fast forward, or, you know, was he making it appear in order to save his sort of honor that he had gone to Paris and was successful?
You know, this is an interesting question for sure. And my take on it, and I don't know if I'm right, but what I got out of that was that it took him a long time to have enough courage to go and meet the chef, even though, because he probably doubted himself, and, you know, then he was there and he kind of had to make his way, and he just didn't make a beeline to go there. Maybe he didn't have enough confidence to think that he could actually work at the restaurant of his dreams. And also because he didn't have papers. And so I think the chefs of the restaurant's hands were tied because he didn't have papers. And so therefore he said, I have an idea, and could you support me? And I think he supported him and trying to, in getting his food truck. And then at that point, with getting the food truck, he made a success. And what I also thought was interesting, and part of what I said was, most all of us, it's almost like the alchemist, you know, you can go far, but what happens, you end up coming back to what you know. And the death of his grandmother was so strong that he wanted to honor her, is what I got. And that really what he knew in his heart, and where he could cook from and he could feel confident about, was all the Moroccan dishes that he knew. And that was something that actually was a need and missing in a place like Paris. You know, that was a new cuisine, and that was something he could do on his own. And that maybe, you know, he was allowed to get papers or whatever after that, but he couldn't just jump in to be a line cook at a famous French restaurant, because he probably, you know, who knew if he had really if he could do that. So that was my feeling.
Interesting. I was just curious because for context, I think you know this, but other people might not know that I was married for 10 years to a West African immigrant who was a diplomat in a former life. But when he came to the United States without papers, he became a blue collar City of New York employee and worker. And so having spent a lot of time in West Africa, I had a firsthand experience for 10 years of being married to an immigrant and very specific immigrant struggles, specifically African immigrant struggles that I recognized in this movie, even though he was a Moroccan immigrant to Europe versus an African immigrant to the United States. And also the appearances that, if in the case of my husband and his culture, that anyone in the States was successful. It didn't matter if you were on the lowest totem pole in the States. Back home, you were seen as successful. And there was a little bit of, well, no one's ever gonna really know what's happening in New York, so like you can tell them anything. Because they're not gonna be coming here anytime soon to find out, you know, that you're not working in a particular, you know, job or thing like that.
But in the end, he actually got what he really wanted, was basically his own restaurant in the form of a food truck. So he wasn't just an employee, you know, so in a sense, he was a great success, you know, because he had his own thing, and then he could go back, and obviously somebody must have given him, you know, the chef must have invested, and then the truck was so successful they put it on a magazine, you know, and so that's what he could take back. And I think it was absolutely true.
Yeah. So related to your experience in Morocco, a couple questions related to that are, you know, are there female chefs in restaurants in Morocco?
Absolutely. And the chef that I work with, Baïja Lafredi, she is, she's amazing. And, you know, when when the man, the small boy is rubbing the couscous between his hands, I had a similar experience that when I walked into a bookstore where she was a bookstore cafe that my friend Marianne Lou Martin had in the Medina. We met for the first time and then decided we would work together because we had such similar ideas, and she was building this place in the countryside in the Palmeraie. And so I remember seeing Baïja out of my, the corner of my eye. I thought, who is that amazing woman, you know, who's over there with her hands, you know, like doing the same thing with the couscous. Mm-hmm. And it was like, I was just mesmerized. And she had had another chef in mind for me who was a really good chef, but she didn't really have the finesse for like teaching or, you know, even to being able to articulate what we needed to know. And so I said, I want to work with her. And so, you know, men are the chefs in restaurants, in some restaurant situations, but the Moroccan women are the chefs and the grandmothers. And she said, even though she had been to culinary school, Baïja, that her grandmother was the one, you know, who inspired her the most. And yeah, I work with her to this day. We've worked together for almost 20 years now. And when we started, she spoke Spanish, I spoke Italian. And that was the way we communicated because I don't speak French or Arabic. And so she's so smart because most people who speak Arabic can speak any language. She now speaks English, but sometimes we communicate still in, you know, other languages, but.
Yeah. Well, somewhat related to this, there's a question about, and I'll come back to my questions, but these seem to be kind of fitting into the conversation about your experiences in Morocco. And this attendee, who is choosing to be anonymous, would like us to talk a little bit about the cultural reality of the young Moroccan's life that was presented in the film. More specifically, you know, do very strict social rules abound still in Morocco? Is there a vast gap between the generations in this regard? And I think there were a number of ways that that played out in the film, but can you comment on that from your observations?
I think there is a vast change, you know, between the older generation and the newer generation. You'd be amazed, though, how many Moroccans that I know in the younger generation still participate in Ramadan, no food and water from 6 to 6 in the evening. That whole point is to sort of get in touch with the suffering around the world, which is kind of amazing that they all do it at the same time. And so even if they're not like particularly religious for the 5 times a day, they still are aware, and it's a cultural experience that they're sharing. And there are quite a few women that don't, wear headscarves, and they choose not to dress in a certain way. They're more Western, and they're a little more free, and they travel and they're educated. So it's not as strict as it is in, I think, other Muslim cultures. I do think it's also at the same time a bit difficult for the educated to find work, because the old mentality or the way of doing things makes it harder for them to get along. And so that's why, they're also attracted to moving on or trying to travel, because they can make so much more money outside of the country than in, even though it's very difficult. And these days, I can tell you that when I'm riding, through the countryside and I go through different cities, you can't imagine how much building there is going on. And how I can tell is that the gray, more concrete buildings are the new buildings that haven't been painted. And it's like ridiculous, so that's like how many people are actually leaving Morocco, working and sending money back. I mean, when I first started, I was one of the only white person on a plane. Often I was the only woman on a plane, and it was very, unsettling at times, like, how's this gonna go, but it was always fine, super respectful. But then now their entire families, children, baby, I mean, there's a lot of migration happening.
Yeah. I want to dive deeper into the topic of food, because we are having this conversation as part of the Flatirons Food Film Festival, and not just film. And so I want to talk about tagine. Tagine obviously played a very central role in this film. And I would love for you to share your thoughts about the role of tagine in Moroccan culture.
Well, tagine is, I would say, the quintessential dish. I mean, couscous and tagine really define Morocco, and you won't see it really anywhere outside of there. Maybe Tunisia, but everything that you saw in the movie was very typical, and it's mostly terracotta, and it's like your own little oven. And so most families in their houses don't really, they have maybe one small toilet, but they don't really have the like shower. That's why they go to the hammam, the place where they scrub and so forth. And so the quartiere, a quarter of the neighborhood of the towns, will have everything you need, like the bakery, the hammam, because you don't have that in your house. So what you do have in your house is like what they call it, a bomba, like the gas bomba, which has a flame. And then that flame can cook your tagine. And so you have one tagine, and they eat tagine every day. And so they take that tagine then, and they put it on a small round table, and they all sort of sit around the round table. They eat with their hands very elegantly, and they pick only from their side of the tagine, and that's how they eat. And it's very, very typical to Morocco. And I haven't seen it anywhere else. And I think I may have mentioned to you once, like when I went to India, I thought, I wonder if Morocco will hold the same fascination for me. Because maybe it's going to be so different than, it might lose something, but not at all. When I came back, I just appreciated it even more because it's so typical. And the tagine is something that is nomadic. I mean, you can have it on the beach. You can have it on the, the gorgeous pasha's table. You have tagine. Everybody has tagine. It's a universal thing that they eat out of in Morocco. And so I once did a safari, like a camel safari down the coast of Essaouira, and we took the tagine and the tent, and we did the whole thing. And we stopped And we got fish from one of the fishermen that was just fishing, and then set up the tents, set up a fire, the mejmar, which is the bottom, it's like a brazier, and you can make coals, you can do that. And we had fish tagine. So it's a wonderful way to cook, and you'll find tagine on every menu.
It's interesting that you say that you'll find tagine on every menu, because a question or a comment and a question coming in is that someone has mentioned that, friends of theirs who've traveled to Morocco said that the food wasn't that interesting because almost everything was tagine. And so it's kind of a comment question, which is how much variety is there? Are there any foods from other cultures there? Or if you go there for say a 7-day or 14-day vacation, are you pretty much going to be eating tagine every day?
No, you don't have to eat tagine every day. They definitely have, well, there are many diversified. Tagine is the cooking vessel itself. Mm-hmm. So, tagine is the name of the pot. It's also the name of the dish, whatever you have going in there. And so if you think about our own cuisine, we have fish, we have chicken, we have vegetables, they do the same thing, but they just have, that is like, I was trying to think of another culture, that is where they cook what they want to cook, because it's what they have. But obviously there's couscous on Fridays, they use also their shakshuka, the tomato sauce with the eggs. They have kefta, they have pestia, which is also delicious. They have, a million, they have a plethora of vegetables and so forth, soups, and they have a lot of French influence, Mm-hmm. And so these days you can also get beautifully sort of more refined Moroccan cuisine that has a French influence that, but it's easy to think for a tourist culture, if you don't penetrate the culture at all, it's like anywhere. You're going to get the tourist kind of like, well, we do 2 types of tagine, chicken and, lamb, and then you'll get maybe couscous, but, they don't usually as a culture eat couscous except on Fridays.
Something that struck me related to this in this viewing, my second viewing of the film, which reminded me of a lot of different cultures where there is something so deeply embedded like tagine, mm-hmm. Or say pasta in Italy, is the intimacy of the relationship with tagine, both from, watching his grandmother move it with her hands, but also when you eat a dish over and over again, you create an intimate relationship with that dish. And so even though, maybe to the novice person, it might just seem like, oh, I'm having tagine again. You develop an appreciation for the nuances. Whereas what I sometimes describe in our culture as like the tenderization of food, which is we don't really have intimate relationships with food. We have encounters with food. So tonight it's Moroccan, tomorrow it's tacos, the next day it's pizza, the next day it's rotisserie chicken. And like, we're always like moving on rather than like, probably the most intimate meal that, besides say a deep family tradition, but as Americans that we have is our American Thanksgiving. But I'm curious if you can comment on that notion of so I guess where this comes from is some might go to Morocco and say, oh, there isn't a lot of variety, or maybe this is, quote unquote boring. But I'm wondering, if you can comment on the different type of relationship that Moroccans have with tagine than maybe we're used to, being able to eat a different thing every night of the week.
Well, I think that's what's, Morocco is not a melting pot. Mm-hmm. We're a melting pot. And so, thank you. We're always, we have to be stimulated, we get bored, but they're very specific, the call to prayer goes off 5 times a day. This is a Muslim culture. There aren't really, even that I know. There's a Jewish synagogue there. I haven't seen sort of Christian, there aren't other kind of religions that are there. So their lives are very much centered around their own culture. Mm-hmm. And so, now when I first started going, it was really not like that. You couldn't see hardly any other kinds of foods at all. But now you actually can go in and buy alcohol. You can buy charcuterie. You can go to a French restaurant. Trying to remember if there are other, I'm only talking about where I know, but Marrakesh is pretty international. So now I think it's a little more diverse. But there was a time when it just wasn't diverse at all. I mean, there's certainly, the families don't go out. The families don't go out to dinner. Tourists go out to dinner.
Yeah.
Families eat at home.
Yes. That's very similar to West African culture, where my former husband used to always say, actually, that poor people go out to dinner because they don't know how to cook good food at home, mm-hmm. that more affluent people eat at home. It's like the opposite here.
Absolutely true. And they will not trust, like yes. in the Place Jamal Fana, the big square in Marrakesh, they have those outdoor stalls that start at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, smoking up a storm, and you can get everything there. But, they would never go because, that's just not good enough quality for them.
Yes. Yeah.
That's tourists.
I had to really train my former husband to trust me to eat out. But before we open it up to questions, I do want to give you an opportunity to share your very unique story about the fact that you mentioned that you were just in Morocco a month ago. And what you shared with me is that you've actually been in Morocco at the beginning of 2 global crises. Not many people can share that type of experience, to be in the same country during 2 different global crises. So I'd love for you to be able to, and the audience to be able to hear about your very particular experience.
Well, it's nice to think that people are still out there listening.
They are. We've got a lot of questions that we'll get to in a few days.
Okay, so, cool. Well, I first went to Morocco with friends it was April 2001. And these were a few American girlfriends that lived in Florence as I did. And so I knew that, my friend Lori spoke French. And so it's like, I have this attraction to go to Morocco. I'm not sure what it is, something in the color and the texture, but I really want to go. Would you go with me? And so she said, yes. So while we were there, and this is very interesting because it has a Boulder connection. So it was David Balduc from the Boulder bookstore who said, you should meet up with my friend Marianne Lynn Martin. She has a bookstore there and she has an interesting project. So I think you should go and check it out. And so I did, we met. I think I told you that's where I also met Baisha. And it was like, wow, this is just too good to be true. So she said, come back in September and we'll finalize everything. So I went back in September of 2001 and I was there. We finalized everything. I went away to Essaouira for a few days. And on my way back to Marrakesh, the taxi driver got a phone call and blah, 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 and then he turned to me and he said, Madame, catastrophe in America. He said, mafia. So I didn't know what that meant. Obviously it was 9/11. And by the time I got back to Marrakesh, I checked into my Riyadh and my daughter called straight away and she told me what had happened. I actually had quite a surreal experience of going out on the terrace and right as the call to prayer went off, a whole flock of, oh gosh, what are they called? Storks, descended on the town right in front of me because that's kind of where their roosts were. And I just was weak in the knees. I just couldn't believe something so poetic and so beautiful could be, so tragic, And that night, Marianne and I had dinner and we thought, what are we going to do? And so, because it was quite shocking. And at that point, we decided that we would definitely continue our project because we found, I really felt like it was super important to break bread. Like this is an opportunity where food can come in and, and to not be so taken, because I also felt from being there in Morocco, the people were so kind. They weren't dancing in the streets, against America. They really were like, Madame, Madame, are you all right? Is your family okay? And so I had this experience of like Morocco was really a good place, a safe place, and that I wanted to be able to continue to offer what I had experienced, the beauty, the deliciousness, the food, the people. And so I continued on, but I was definitely there during 9/11. And I didn't see a television. I knew and read and what was going on, was told, but I didn't even see a newspaper until the following day when I got on the airplane to go to Italy. I didn't go to America, but planes were still flying to Italy. And so it was the first kind of image that I got. So I was not steeped in imagery of what happened, It was kind of low key in that way. What I did get an experience of was probably the exact opposite experience most people thought I would have.
Yep. So fast forward to February and March 2020.
Well, so there you go. Almost 20 years later, I'm still doing programs, in Morocco, and it actually has been one of my best and most successful programs. I think because people are curious, and not to mention it just has so much to offer. But there I am finishing the last program just in March, and I'm aware that the virus is kind of happening, and it hasn't really reached. It has reached Italy because I can't go to Italy, and so I'm thinking, well, okay, I'll just stay in Morocco because it seems like it's warm here, and maybe it won't be so much of a problem. And what my prerogative was at the time was just to make sure that the people who were on my trips got where they needed to go, like to get home and get out. And certainly the flights had not stopped at that point, but it was a little tricky. Some were being canceled and so forth and so on. But I had set myself up to stay for a month because I had not planned to come home until the end of April. And I was in Janan Tamsna and this beautiful garden and, plenty, very at home. I felt no sense of urgency whatsoever. And
you mean you didn't want to come back to the snowiest city in America?
No, at that point I thought, I think I can let that rest. I can let that rest. There's a pool, it was all just kind of lovely. But I got a call the next morning and from a family member who said, you know what, I don't know if you know this, but the New York Times just said that that Morocco has just declared a state of emergency, and you should fill out your name on this website, and because they're going to close indefinitely. So the indefinite part was a little bit more than I wanted to flirt with, and so I asked them. I told them, okay, I'll put my name on the list. And 5 minutes later, I got a confirmation, and 3 hours later I was on a plane and evacuated. So I really wasn't planning on doing that. I didn't feel the exact need to do that, but I feel like it was the right thing to do.
Well, things come in threes, so I can only imagine what's going to happen next time.
Don't say that.
Sorry.
Don't say that.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing some of your stories. I want to jump over and kind of
Sure.
do more rapid fire into the questions that have been coming in. Specifically a question around food that came in was, and I was going to ask you, I'm going to tie this into something I was going to ask you, which is, outside of the movie, to your experience in Morocco, what's a very particularly memorable or favorite Moroccan meal or dish that you've had? And the particular question from Sandra is, are there any particular, vegetable dishes from Morocco that you particularly enjoy?
Well, the bestia, you've heard pastilla, bestia, is this incredible, incredible dish. You'll think this is really funny because You know, it's elegant in so many ways because it has, it's a chicken pastilla with almonds, and the almonds are crushed with sugar. I mean, sugar is not something I ever eat, but this is a very elegant dish with warka, you know, layers and layers of chicken and almonds and, you know, cinnamon. And, you know, I know you particularly don't like anything sweet with your food, but, you know, orange blossom water. I mean, it's really something out of this world. And so that is one of my favorite dishes. I don't like to eat it too often, of course, because it's really a special thing. They would have at weddings and so forth, but we teach people how to make it because it's just so phenomenal. But the one time I do remember, the most memorable is not exactly positive. When Ruth Reichel came, she did, was one of Gourmet's top 10 places to go, you know, on one of her shows. And what we did, we filmed the Bastia, but she didn't want to have it until later that night. And then we had it because they wanted to film at night with candlelight on the tables and so forth. And, you know, of course it wasn't good at that point. And she complained about like the fact that it wasn't good. And so isn't that funny? You know, that happens to be my most memorable meal there. I mean,
just so everyone knows, Ruth Reichel was the former editor of Gourmet magazine. And prior to that was the restaurant critic for the New York Times. Any particular vegetable dishes that are stand out or a favorite of yours to eat or to cook? Or
yes, in the season, we make what's called we call it, it's more French, you know, it's like eggplant caviar or zalouk, you know. No, it's not zalouk, it's eggplant caviar where we, but zalouk is also amazing. So it's still based in eggplant. So you can smoke the eggplant, you know, just over the brazier of the mejmar, you know, I told you about. And then you scoop out the eggplant and you mix it with paprika, salt, pepper, and you know, certainly yogurt is not a version that was particularly Moroccan, but sometimes we'll have yogurt in tahini, and it's a little more like baba ganoush. But roasted eggplant or eggplant in general in Morocco is delicious, I think, because it loves to grow there. And the zalouk is tomatoes and eggplant cooked together for a really long time, and with garlic and olive oil, and then you garnish it with a bit of cilantro, and it's delicious.
Interesting. It sounds there's a lot of descriptions there when you were saying eggplant and tomato that was making me think of caponata in your Italy connection, you know, and also eggplant and tomato, thinking of ratatouille.
Yeah. So
all those things that kind of move around the Mediterranean.
It's much different, but yeah.
Another question that came in a little bit ago, you had mentioned something about Moroccans eating couscous on Fridays. And the question is, why do they only eat couscous on Friday? Or
it's their holy day. You know, like Sunday would be, you know, when people go to church, it's the day they pray. It's a day for families to get together. And so they make a big couscous.
Okay.
Yeah.
And another food specific question is, if I see bread, like we did in the movie, is it always made from wheat in Morocco?
It's also made from barley. Barley, khobz, Khobz is the way they say their bread. They in the Berber villages, they cook them in the clay ovens, which is also delicious. But wheat, and it's I would say the wheat and the barley is usually grown right there and milled right there, and so it's absolutely delicious. And it's a little bit different to try to do it here, just because you can't sort of, you know, what's the word? You can't copy the flavor of those grains, but barley is something that they use a lot of.
Right. And now a couple questions taking us back into the film territory. And I have some thoughts on a couple of these as well. But the question comes in from Karen, who says, you know, if Elias didn't have papers, can he go back and forth between France and Morocco? And then there's another question of, you know, where was Suleiman from? And how are Moroccans seen and treated in France today?
You know, it's hard to say. what happened with papers, because papers are a serious thing.
Mhm.
And he may have gotten into the country, without papers, but he couldn't have gone home without papers. And so that's why I think the fact that he, established a business with the help of his friend, he must have gotten papers, because there's no way he could have gone back and forth. And you can't actually leave Morocco unless you have a certain amount of money in the bank. And that's controlled, and it's really not easy at all to get visas.
Yeah.
So, Suleiman, I'm not sure what part of Africa. I don't know why I don't remember that now. I don't remember that.
My only clue to that was I Shazammed the music when they went out dancing to see where that music was from, and it was an Afro pop song from Ghana. And so that was my only clue. I wasn't sure myself. But I did have an observation, because his relationship with Suleiman was, it particularly resonated with me. And I felt like I understood what the filmmaker was trying to do with that scene where Elias was cooking in his kitchen for his family, because there's a tendency for the dominant culture, and we could apply the same thing in America, to perceive all immigrants who either like look somewhat alike or maybe speak the same language, like Spanish, that they're all from the same culture. And nothing could be further from the truth. And so what I took away from that experience is, to the French, to the Parisians, they were just immigrants, day laborers, but they couldn't be more different. They couldn't be more different from different cultures. And yet obviously they're thrown into the situation where they have to try to help each other. And so to me, it was so beautiful to show that there is tremendous diversity amongst what we might think of as a homogenous immigrant population. And the same happens to Latinos. There could be nothing more different than Cuban culture and Mexican culture. But if you've got that, so-called, Latino look and you speak Spanish, they just think you're the same. So that to me was very interesting to try. I felt like it was very much, that part of the film was very much trying to tease out the diversity within immigrant culture.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. But, I think from the lens of people who look at others or people of color as immigrants, it's also, unfortunate that they feel like they're taking something away, from jobs and so forth. So they're not able to really see them for who they are. And I think, as we said earlier, that's one reason why I thought that, I think it was one of the purposes of making this film, to show that they're not really, we're all immigrants, actually. Yeah.
And the other thing just about that, and then we'll get to the last question here, is as an immigrant, you're always living a dual life. The immigrant story is set up, as if you're leaving one place and going to another, but you never fully leave. I mean, you saw that in Elias, that even while he was in Paris, he was dealing with the pressures of back home. And so that idea that, you're always faced with the tensions of, and your identity is always rooted in both places.
I've definitely noticed that from several cultures who have come here, and I know quite a few of my Italian friends have become more Italian here than they were at home. You're looking for America because you want to come to America, you want to be American, you don't even know what that means, and then you get here and you realize, maybe I don't really, need to be American, and I really do, appreciate my culture, and you become more Italian here than you are at home. Or more, of who you are. It becomes exaggerated. And I think that became clear in the movie in the end, is that he realized that who he really was and what he really knew was his own culture and his own food culture.
Mm-hmm. Another thing related to that, and this relates to our last question here from Dina, is she brings up the point in the movie where the French chef is in Morocco and he's on his way to a very specific olive orchard. And he asks Youssef if he knows where that is. And I'm curious what your take is on that, because she's asking, you know, what is the significance of that, you know, olive production or that local flavor. And my take on that was that Youssef kind of was like, yeah, I know the guy, but I don't know the orchard, kind of like dismissive of it. And yet obviously the French chef had come from Paris to here to go there. And to me, my take is that sometimes it's outsiders coming into your culture that help you realize the value of the, you know, the natural treasures that are right there in front of you that you maybe just take for granted. And if they're just surrounded by orchards, Youssef was probably, I don't know, you know, it's just another olive orchard. But do you want to comment on that in terms of?
Sure, but I think you've really hit on something, because it's exactly, I feel like, why I've maybe been successful with my own work is because I go in, you know, with a big interest in what's happening in many of these regions, and I'm curious, and I get into kitchens and bakeries and go out into the fields, and I want to taste the olive oil. So, you know, they're so happy to show you, because it's like their own people don't have an interest, you know, if they're bakers who are there, been in there since 2 a.m, you know, who cares, you know, like, no, this is something really unique for us. And so I do think so. And people have also often been very surprised and curious, like, well, why would you go to Sicily? Or, you know, why would you, you know, how have you, you know, been, why have you been going to Sicily for so long? The Sicilians were incredibly kind and open to me. They cannot stand the people from the north. They're not really open to even their own, but they were really open to me, you know, because I had a different curiosity and I wasn't sort of taking advantage or looking down on them in a way, you know, I was just curious. So I do have my own experience of that.
Great. Well, I think given that we were only supposed to have Q&A for about 30 to 45 minutes and we're 15 minutes over, but we've kept a lot of people here. And so I think we're going to wrap up, and I have a couple of wrap up duties. So first of all, I want to, since you can't hear the round of applause from everyone out there, I want to say, but if anybody's interested to go into Morocco in November, I'm actually still going. So you can look at my website, peggymarkel.com. If you're interested, I'm going back. So great. Thank you, Sarah. I was going to give you an opportunity to have a call to action to learn more. Great. But I do want to shout out to all our beloved chefs and how much we care about them in this community. And I'm just, you know, here with arms wide open to support. And I'm glad that this has attracted such a large group of people, to let them know that they're not alone and that we really do care. Yes, yes, we do care. So thank you very much, Peggy, for sharing and helping us armchair travel tonight. I really appreciate it. This is a big night out for me. I feel like I just went on a Moroccan adventure through this film and through you sharing your stories of Morocco. So we really appreciate you being here. I want to thank everyone in our audience who joined us. And I just want to give you a couple of heads up. You're going to be receiving a survey, a very short poll to help Julia and the team learn from this. We were the guinea pigs tonight, so thank you again, as Greg said, for bearing with us through technical difficulties and any other challenges that we had. But we greatly appreciate your feedback because, as Greg mentioned, there's going to be the sushi film next Friday that we encourage everyone to buy a ticket for and tune in. And we really want your feedback so that we can make this dinner and a movie from the Flatiron Food Film Festival as enjoyable as possible for everyone. So I'm just checking my notes to make sure that I covered all my to-dos. Tune in next Friday, the survey. And I guess I'll also just end on thanking Julia and Greg and the whole Flatiron Food Film Festival for this great idea to allow us to gather in these new ways, gather and travel in these new ways. And as Peggy said, a special thank you to all of the chefs in restaurants who created Moroccan-inspired food for all of us to enjoy tonight. As soon as we hang up, I look forward to going to the hashtag FFFF, Flatiron Food Film Festival 20, and checking out what you all were eating. That was probably a lot more exciting than my cheeseburger. So thank you all very much. And I was just dragging that goodbye out a little bit in case Julia wanted to chime in with any last minute things. These hashtags are very hard. Just think 4 Fs on the hashtags when you're posting your pictures to social media. So it's like hashtag 4 Fs online, hashtag 4 Fs dinner and a movie, hashtag 4 Fs 20. And post your pictures of your food. And I won't see you, I don't know who's doing the moderation in the panel next Friday, if there is one, but I'm definitely planning to buy a ticket. So look forward to seeing everyone next Friday and eating sushi.
Sounds
Okay.
good. Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Hey, it's Julia John.
Oh, hi, Julia.
I'm the PS at the end of the night. So, yeah, there's going to be a panel next week, and it's going to be the director of the film, East Side Sushi, Anthony Lucero, and Mara King, who is a female sushi chef, but is best known as the chef and co-founder of Azuke, and Clay Fong, the restaurant critic of the Daily Camera. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Peggy and Sarah and Greg, it's been tremendous. And the big shout out goes to the woman behind the throne, or I can't remember. I think it was Wizard of Oz. Karen Spies. She's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Have a good night, everyone. I'm going to turn it off now.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.